to my channel, where today I'll be going over Stitch Fiddle for complete beginners. Now, despite the title, whether you have no idea what Stitch Fiddle is, or even if you have some experience with Stitch Fiddle, I hope that you can find some value from this video. I hope to introduce a tool for creating tapestry crochet pieces, as well as outlining steps to make these from ground zero. I'm going to be going over what Stitch Fiddle is, the features that exist in both the free and paid plans, steps for crochet, and specifically creating crochet tapestry pieces, as well as walking you through the software UI. Now, this is going to be a companion video that's going to be sort of broken down into two parts. The first part, I'll be covering all this information. However, in the second part is when I'll be going into more detail in terms of actual design and design tips. Now, what is Stitch Fiddle? Stitch Fiddle is an online software that enables users to create patterns from different crafts. So common ones are crochet, knitting, and cross stitch, but there are others that exist. These patterns are created essentially from pixel graphs and placement of different colors in a various amount of shapes to make different designs. So for instance, this stitch right here was created using Stitch Fiddle. And I like to think of all patterns as sort of recipes. So the recipe is going to tell you what you need, how much you need, and what to do with those ingredients to essentially make the end product that, of course, you want to try. In the case of Stitch Fiddle and platforms that are like Stitch Fiddle, if you think of the black box method where you have something that's being inputted, you have a bunch of other stuff that you're not seeing going on, and then you have something that's spit out, I kind of like to think of it in the opposite way of a traditional pattern. So in this case, you are essentially saying, I want something that's going to look like this. And your end goal is essentially to get a way in which you can decipher what the actual steps are to create that thing, if that makes sense. So hopefully that's not too confusing. With Stitch Fiddle specifically, there are two sort of tiers of accounts, or two tiers of experience for the software. So there's the free version, which has smaller basic feature allotments, as well as limitations on both downloading and editing tools. Then you have the premium account or premium tier, which offers you a larger feature allotments and enables you to download all types and access all editing tools. When we go down to the specifics, for free you have up to 15 charts. You, for each chart, can use 50 unique colors and symbols. You can only get a max grid size of around 300 by 300, although make no mistake, that is still a pretty considerable amount. You have availability to all colors. You can essentially upload pictures in order to use that for creation of charts. You can collaborate with other users and share your charts with other people, as well as creating charts from QR codes and access to copy and paste functionality. For premium, you get, of course, all of these features that come with free, with unlimited numbers of charts. You can use up to 200 unique colors and symbols per chart, and you get a max grid size of around 1,000 by 1,000, or around 1,000,000 stitches, which that's insane. When it comes to what other things that are available in premium versus not available in free, we talked about before about downloading and how you get access to essentially all of the download formats that are available through Stitch Fiddle. So think things like PDFs, docx files, XLS files, or Excel documents. For editing wise, you can do things like adjusting the row/column start number, the fill feature, which is going to greatly expedite the amount of time it takes, because rather than having to fill in each individual pixel, you can then start doing like whole columns and rows and things like that. You can actually convert charts into written instructions, so that kind of goes into what we talked about before about how you have that black box method. So you're essentially giving the software whatever picture or reference that you want, and in turn, once you of course get all the refining and things done, it can spit out actual like word instructions, which are going to be way easier to actually create or actually follow in terms of, replicating that design in the physical. You have organization tools like being able to have folders and search through your charts. You can actually create custom colors that from your picture references. So I'll kind of go through more of this in the walkthrough in terms of what that means. But with Stitch Fiddle, let's say you were to import a certain picture, it will automatically kind of scan that photo for what colors are existent there. And let's say you decide you need 5 colors, it'll immediately populate around 20 colors, but when you go from 20 to 5, it's going to automatically detect / choose those colors. And a lot of the times it'll do a generally okay job, but sometimes it does like not that well, or maybe you just kind of want specific colors that you had in mind, and that's a feature that you then have access to with Premium. Pivoting from actual features, when we talk about the overall process to go from entering onto the site to having a tangible thing that you can then use to replicate the design that you so choose, here's the overall process. You're going to start by logging in or creating an account, which I highly recommend if you want to save your actual charts and come back to them at later times, or even just access some of these features like exporting tools to download your actual charts. Then you're going to select your craft details. So similar to what we talked about, if you're doing crochet or knitting or cross stitch, you're going to choose your yarn, the project type that you're actually going for, and then you're going to create your chart either from a reference or from an empty grid. If we're talking from a reference, this would involve importing your actual photo reference, adjusting the settings, which are going to include things like the size as well as the yarn colors, and then refining and editing that design once you're in the actual chart editing interface. From scratch, this would involve adjusting the number of rows and columns. You then go in when you're in the chart editing interface, picking your colors, and then overall starting your design. Now I'm going to actually take you through the site of Stitch Fiddle. I'm now going to be going over the overall software UI for Stitch Fiddle. In general, you're going to start out in this screen, which is essentially going to be where you're creating your new chart. You have this side panel with a couple other things. So there's the sign up / login, which is where you'd either create your account or log into a pre-existing one. Products and yarns, which is going to take you through what is in their database in terms of their yarns, or if you're doing like other crafts like threads and things like that, as well as the colors that are provided for those different ones. Stitches, if you're using the symbol aspect of things, we're not really going to go into that today, as well as the help center and about page. Now, it's going to prompt you to choose your craft. In this case, we're going to do crochet. From there, it's going to ask you what kind of crochet are you looking into doing. Since we're trying to do tapestry color crochet, or color work is what it would fall under, we're going to click this one. From here, it's going to ask you what kind of yarn you're looking to use, and this is where those products and yarns will come in handy if you wanted to review that beforehand. If you don't, that's fine too. In general, if you're going into this and you're mainly focused on the design aspect of things and you don't necessarily have in mind a yarn brand or color that you're trying to use, I recommend going no preference. You can always go in afterwards and edit the yarn, both the brand as well as the color that you're using, so it's not a big deal. From here, it's going to ask you how exactly you want to start. There's a couple options here, but don't get bogged down by the extra stuff. The main two options are either from a completely empty chart, where you're going to be designing every single pixel / stitch, or from a picture. Of course, I would say that the easier of the two in terms of refinement is going to be the from picture, but the from empty is going to, I feel like, have less bells and whistles at the beginning. Either of the two, it's fairly easy. So we're going to start with the empty one. It's going to ask you for the grid size, which is essentially going to be how wide and tall your tapestry is going to be. And you can eyeball it using these two and just adjust them, especially if you maybe know how, column and row wise, you have a specific number in mind. But if you maybe don't, or you want to be more accurate with how big it's going to come out, you can actually create a sample swatch. It actually gives you the instructions right here for that. But let's say you do a 4x4 inch square, which is pretty standard. You can then adjust the stitch count. So actually, if you don't want to use inches, you can also use centimeters. But let's say you adjust the stitch count. So we're going to put some random numbers. Let's just say 17 stitches wide and 21 rows tall. Then it'll immediately populate and tell you that this will be a 70 by 75 width and height project, and that'll be 16.47 by 14.29 inches. From there, if you, let's say, had specific numbers you wanted for here, so let's say you wanted to be like 12 by 16 inches, then it'll adjust the stitch count, or if you wanted, you could adjust the stitch count and it'll adjust those parameters. Most of the time, I find myself gravitating to the size-wise and adjusting that, and then from there, it'll give me, whatever stitch count it's going to give me based on the sample swatch. So then you can create your chart, and it'll bring you into this entirely blank chart that has, it's sized the way that you want it to. As you can see, it gives you pre-populated colors kind of all over the place, assuming, you might want to use one of these, but you can easily edit out what colors you don't want and add in ones that you do. So you would click this palette icon right there, and then you can adjust the colors you want to use. So in this case, let's say I want red, pink, white, and then I also want to add like black. We're going to take out all the colors we don't want. You can just push the X icon like so. And then we have these three, but we still need to add black. So you can choose add up here. And from there, you can choose the generic black. That's no preference. But here's where I talked about where I said that you could easily edit and change the yarn brand and colors. So if we decide that we want to use Red Heart Super Saver, it's going to load on in the colors they have. And for here, we want black, so we're going to save their version of black. You can also edit the colors that are pre-existing by using the palette button, and then you can choose what looks like a wrench, and it'll take you to the color section where you can then do the same thing. Rouge. Sometimes, depending on what brand that you choose, they won't exactly have the same look or appearance color-wise as the no preference, or what I would call generic coloring for the software. So just be mindful of that. There are some tools that you can use up here. Some of them do require premium, but the general gist, especially if you have a free account, would be, so up here you can go to show my charts, and that's if you want to, like, let's say exit from this overall working on this chart to all the charts that you have in general. You can mess around with the scrolling overall, the zoom, either through this box or using the shortcuts that they choose. You can also just fit it into view if you want. The bottom panel in this case is going to open up each color and tell you how many pixels it has. In this case, we haven't done anything, so it's all white. You have the progress tracker. Some of these other tools, again, only available through one if you have an account, but also premium. There's written in color block instructions button, downloading of your chart. Of course, you have an undo function. If I were to carry out an action, I can undo it, but of course you also then can redo it. Drawing of stitches, which is essentially going to be your active area to like edit any of these pixels in your chart. There's the draw lines. I don't really mess with that a lot, but especially if you're working from an empty design, you might want to do some planning for it. So like you're like, okay, I want a triangle design. So then, oh, I forgot to exit out of that. So then it'll kind of show you the general guidelines that you're working with in terms of that. There's also an erase function if you ever want to erase anything that you've made, as well as a select function. Just be mindful that some of the tools, like I talked about, might not be available because of premium. Now we're going to pivot to if you were using a reference photo. So you would still have the same sort of dialogue in terms of what you have to pick in the beginning. But instead of picking empty your own design, you're going to do from picture. And it's going to prompt you to choose a file from your local drive. In this case, we're going to do a very simplistic design. So you can at any time re-choose or choose a different photo that you want to use. Choose by clicking that button, and then it'll just take you to your local drive where you can then choose it. If you want to crop the photo, you can. I've already kind of cropped it, but let's say I wanted to make it a little bigger. You can do that. You can rotate this. Right now it is uneven, so it's 148 stitches or pixels by 150. If we wanted to, for instance, make it be an exact square, just for symmetry purposes, you can choose that icon. And then we can kind of adjust the stitch count. The more stitches that you do, which of course is going to change one or both dimensions, it really depends on if it's a square, the more detailed it's going to be, but it's also going to make your project bigger and bigger. So you see it's 61,000 stitches if you do 247 by 247 stitches. Whereas if you go down, you're going to have less stitches and therefore a smaller project, but you are going to lose some of those detailing. I would say that this really depends on what your reference or what your goal is. Sometimes you want really detailed tapestries, so you'll do more stitches, or you might do a more simplistic design at the beginning and then refine it, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But overall, you can do that. For size-wise purposes, I'd recommend what we talked about before with the empty chart, where you making a gauge swatch and then adjusting based on the size that you want. So here's what it gives us. As you can see, though, we lost a considerable amount of detailing. Then you get into the yarn section. It automatically gives you a preset of around 20 colors, which most of the time you probably don't need that many colors. In this case, the design is very simplistic, and I think we only really need 2 colors. So we can do that. From there, you can adjust things like the brightness and the contrast. I usually don't mess with that, but again, depending on how detailed or how you want your design to look, that might be something that you want to consider using. I kind of want to change this to a little bit bigger, let's just say. Okay, it'll give us more detailing, so you can adjust that accordingly. If you want to choose specific colors, let's say I have the 20 colors, the ones that automatically populate for you're not a fan of, then you can always go in and change that, but only if you have a premium account. We're just going to go in and choose a specific brand, and as you can see, it kind of adjusts based on the yarn that is in the database. From there, we can actually save the chart, and here it is. You have the exact same tools that you had before. In this case, if you were using a reference, it's likely that what you're going to be going in and doing is refining that. So any details that you feel are missing or maybe you need adjusting, you can go in and change that. So small things here or there. For instance, this A, I feel like it's a little less obvious that is an A. So you can kind of like change things to that nature. But that's essentially, all that you're doing is kind of just adjusting things till it fits, sort of the mold or what you have in the photo or in your mind how you wanted it to look. That's going to be all. I hope you enjoyed that walkthrough. If you are interested in creating tapestry patterns of your own, I do feel that Stitch Fiddle may be a beneficial resource. It's not to say it's the only resource, but across, in general, tapestry pattern creation, it is one that I found and that I myself enjoy using. With a free or basic account, you can start with creating your charts, although it will take longer and you might not have access to some features that make it faster, more streamlined, and give you access to more things. However, with a small fee, you can upgrade to a premium account if you do want more features. Overall though, no matter what tier you use, I find that pattern creation using this website is pretty easy and streamlined and very intuitive. Now, next time I'm going to actually be taking you more into depth into the overall design process. So I'm going to be going over tapestry difficulty, so easy, intermediate, and advanced, and give you some tips and ways to look out for how you would decipher which tapestries fall into which ones. And this I feel like is more applicable to whenever you're going out and finding like, oh, I like this tapestry design or this tapestry design, which is a good way to dip your toe into that world. I'm going to be going over / giving you some design rules that are going to be very helpful whether you're going from complete scratch on making a chart or if you're going from a reference photo. And then I'm actually going to also be walking through some examples with you on how you would, using reference photos, create tapestry pattern designs in Stitch Fiddle. That's going to be all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a like, and I hope you have a wonderful day.